The river was running high that April morning, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. I'd been kayaking the Skycomish for 23 years, knew every rapid between Index and Sultan like the veins on my hands. The water temperature couldn't have been more than 45 degrees, cold enough to kill you in minutes if you went in without a wetsuit. I was paddling alone, which my wife Helen would have given me hell about if she'd known. But after 34 years of marriage, a man needs his solitude sometimes. The morning mist was just starting to burn off, that golden hour light cutting through the Douglas firs. Perfect conditions, I thought. No one else on the river yet. That's when I heard it. Not a scream exactly, more like a high-pitched keening that cut right through the rush of water. It was coming from downstream, near Boulder Drop, the Class 4 rapid that had claimed 2 lives in the past decade. I dug my paddle in hard, shooting forward through the current. The sound came again, desperate and raw. As I rounded the bend, I saw something in the water, caught against a partially submerged log right at the edge of the main current. My first thought was bear cub, dark, hairy, about the size of a large dog. But the way it was gripping that log, the way its head turned when it saw me coming, that wasn't any bear. The thing looked right at me. The face was all wrong for an animal. Too flat, too expressive. The eyes weren't the black beads of a bear, but something lighter, almost amber in the morning sun. And the hands. Jesus Christ, they were hands, not paws, wrapped around that log with opposable thumbs and everything. The current was pulling at it hard. Another few seconds, and it would lose its grip, get sucked into Boulder Drop. No way it would survive that washing machine of rocks and hydraulics. I made the decision without thinking, the same way I'd made 100 rescue decisions over the years. Except this time, I had no idea what I was rescuing. I ferried across the current, using the river's power to push me toward the log. The thing watched me coming, those amber eyes locked on mine. When I got close, maybe 6 feet away, I could see more details. The hair was reddish-brown, matted with river water. The body was built strange, arms too long for its torso, legs that bent at angles that seemed almost but not quite human. And the smell, even over the river's mineral scent, was something wild and musky, like wet dog mixed with pine sap and something earthier I couldn't name. I reached out with my paddle blade, trying to give it something to grab. The creature understood immediately, reaching out with one impossibly long arm. When its hand closed around the paddle, I felt the strength in it, even exhausted as it was. This thing could have snapped my paddle like a twig if it wanted to, but it didn't. It held on carefully, deliberately, as I pulled it toward my kayak. That's when everything went wrong. The current caught my boat, spinning me. The creature lost its grip on the log, and we both went into the main flow. I felt the kayak flip, the shock of cold water flooding my sinuses. Training kicked in, and I wet exited, came up gasping. But I still had hold of my paddle, and somehow, impossibly, the creature still had hold of the other end. We were heading straight for Boulder Drop. I could hear the thunder of it, feel the pull accelerating. I'm going to die, I thought. I'm going to die trying to save something that shouldn't even exist. Then I felt myself being pulled, hard, toward the left bank. The creature was swimming with its free arm, kicking with powerful legs, dragging both me and my kayak out of the main current. Its strength was unreal. Within seconds, we were in the slower water near shore, then scraping against river rocks in the shallows. I collapsed on a gravel bar, gasping and shaking. The creature dragged itself a few feet away and curled into a ball, making soft, whimpering sounds. Up close, out of the water, I could see it was young. Maybe the equivalent of a 5- or 6-year-old human child, though it was hard to tell. Its proportions were all wrong by human standards, but there was something undeniably juvenile about it. The way it held itself, scared and exhausted. The way it kept looking back at the forest, then at me, then back at the forest. I should have been terrified, should have been running. but all I felt was a strange protectiveness. This thing, whatever it was just a scared kid who'd nearly drowned. I found myself talking to it the way I'd talked to my own children when they were small and frightened. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. You're okay." The creature stopped whimpering and looked at me. Really looked at me. There was intelligence in those eyes. Not just animal awareness, but actual comprehension. It understood tone, if not words. Slowly, carefully, it uncurled itself and sat up. That's when I heard the other sound. A low, rumbling call from the forest above us. The young one's head snapped toward the sound, and it made a responding cry, high and plaintive. The call came again, closer this time, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. Whatever had made that sound was big, much bigger than the infant I'd pulled from the river. The young one stood up, shaky on legs that seemed too long for its body. It looked at me one more time, tilted its head in what I swear was a gesture of acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. Then it turned and scrambled up the bank, disappearing into the salal and sword ferns faster than should have been possible. I sat there on that gravel bar for probably 20 minutes, shaking from more than just the cold. My kayak had fetched up against some rocks downstream, paddle still attached by its leash. I should have been thinking about hypothermia, about getting warm and dry. But all I could think about was what I'd just seen, what I'd just touched. I'd pulled something out of that river that all my education, all my 47 years of life experience said couldn't exist. But it did. I had felt its grip on my paddle, seen the intelligence in its eyes, smelled its wild scent. Either I was losing my mind, or everything I thought I knew about the natural world was incomplete. I retrieved my kayak and paddled the remaining 3 miles to the takeout in a daze. My truck was waiting in the empty parking area, morning frost still on the windshield. I loaded my gear mechanically, turned the heater on full blast, and sat there steaming in my wet gear, trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't tell Helen. How could I? "Honey, I saved a baby Bigfoot from drowning today." Wasn't exactly dinner conversation. I said I'd taken a swim, needed to practice my role. She fussed over me, made me hot soup, checked me for signs of hypothermia. Normal things, human things, while my mind kept replaying that impossible moment when the creature had looked into my eyes with unmistakable intelligence. 3 days passed. I went to work at the hardware store, came home, ate dinner, watched TV with Helen, pretended everything was normal. But I kept thinking about that young creature, wondering if it had survived, if its parent had found it. On the 4th morning, a Saturday, I told Helen I was going fishing and drove back to the river. I'm not sure what I expected to find. Evidence, maybe. Tracks in the mud. Something to prove I hadn't hallucinated the whole thing. I parked at the takeout and hiked upstream along the bank, following deer trails and fishermen's paths. When I reached the gravel bar where we'd collapsed, I stopped dead. There, arranged in a deliberate line on a flat river rock, were 3 things that made my heart race. A chunk of raw gold the size of a walnut, stream-worn but unmistakably real. An obsidian arrowhead, perfectly napped, edges still sharp enough to draw blood. And a piece of carved bone or antler, old and yellowed, showing what looked like a bear and something else, something walking upright, etched in surprising detail. I looked around, scanning the forest. Nothing moved except the usual birds and squirrels, but I had the distinct feeling of being watched, not in a threatening way, more like an assessment. I picked up the gold, heavy in my hand. This wasn't river gold, not the fine flakes and tiny nuggets you sometimes found with a pan. This was a solid chunk, probably worth several $1,000s. The arrowhead was museum quality, the kind of artifact that would have archaeologists excited. But it was the carved bone that made my hands shake. The scene it depicted was clear once you looked closely. A human figure in a boat, reaching out. A smaller figure in wavy lines suggesting water. a larger figure on the shore. It was crude, but unmistakable. Someone had watched our rescue and recorded it. I put all 3 items in my pocket and hiked back to my truck. When I got home, I hid them in my tackle box in the garage, underneath the lead weights and spare hooks. Helen never went in there. It was my space, my sanctuary. Now, it was my secret vault. A week went by, then 2. I went back to the river twice more, found nothing. Started to convince myself it had been some elaborate prank or misunderstanding. Maybe someone had trained a chimp, dressed it in a suit. Maybe the gifts were coincidence, left by a gold prospector or artifact hunter who happened to use that rock. But I knew better. The weight of that creature pulling me from the current had been real. The intelligence in its eyes had been real, and whoever had left those gifts had known exactly what they meant, exactly what debt was being acknowledged. It was late May when I saw her. I'd gone back to the river alone, this time bringing my fly rod as an excuse. The salmon weren't running yet, but I could pretend to be after early summer steelhead. I was working a deep pool about a mile upstream from the rescue site when I felt that sensation again, being watched. I turned slowly, keeping my movements casual, like I was just checking my backcast clearance. She was standing in the shadows between 2 massive cedars, maybe 40 yards away. Even at that distance, even partially hidden, her size was staggering. 8 feet tall at least, probably more. Shoulders broader than any human, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that looked almost black in the shade. She didn't move. Neither did I. We stood there, 2 creatures separated by 40 yards and millions of years of evolution, watching each other. I could make out her face, more clearly than I'd seen the young ones. Heavy brow ridge, flat nose, wide mouth. But the eyes were what held me. Brown, not amber like the young ones, with a depth of intelligence that made my chest tight. Slowly, deliberately, she raised one massive hand and placed it on her chest. Then she extended it toward me, palm out. A gesture so universally human it couldn't be mistaken for anything but acknowledgement. "Thank you," it said. "You saved my child." I raised my own hand in response, palm out, fighting the tremor in my fingers. She held the gesture for another heartbeat, then turned and melted back into the forest. No sound, no broken branches or rustling ferns. For something that probably weighed 400 pounds, she moved like smoke. I stood there for another 10 minutes, rod forgotten, heart hammering. Then I reeled in my line and hiked back to the truck. I had my confirmation. The gifts hadn't been coincidence. The rescue had been witnessed. And now I'd been thanked, formally, by a mother whose child I'd saved. That should have been the end of it. A strange story to never tell, a secret to carry to my grave. But it wasn't. Because once you know something exists, once you've looked into its eyes and seen recognition looking back, you can't unknow it. The world becomes a different place. Every shadow in the forest might be watching. Every breaking branch might be deliberate. Every gift of nature might be exactly that. A gift, placed with purpose and intent. I started going back to the river more often. Not to fish, though I carried my rod as cover. I went to learn, to observe, to understand. I never saw her that clearly again, but I knew she was there. Sometimes I'd find things. A perfect eagle feather placed on a stump where I often sat. A handful of huckleberries on a rock, fresh picked, when I'd mentioned to the air that I was hungry. Once, after I'd twisted my ankle on a root and was limping badly, I found a walking stick leaned against my truck, carved with simple patterns, exactly the right height. Helen noticed my absences, my distraction. "You're different," she said one evening in July. "Ever since that day you went swimming. What aren't you telling me?" I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to share this impossible burden. But I looked at her, my practical wife who balanced checkbooks and believed in what she could see and touch, and I knew I couldn't. It would sound like madness. Maybe it was madness. Maybe I'd hit my head in that river and everything since had been traumatic brain injury manifesting as elaborate hallucination. But the gold was real. I'd taken it to a dealer in Seattle, pretending I'd inherited it from an uncle. $4,300 he'd given me. Cash. The arrowhead was real too. I'd shown it to a professor at the University of Washington, said I'd found it hiking. He'd gotten excited, said it was pristine, probably 2,000 years old, begged me to donate it to their collection. I'd declined, said it had sentimental value. The carved bone I kept close, usually in my pocket. Sometimes I'd take it out and run my fingers over the etched lines. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that someone, something, had witnessed that morning on the river and felt it important enough to record. August came hot and dry. Fire season. The Forest Service issued warnings, then restrictions. No campfires, no smoking. Some areas closed entirely. The river ran low, exposing rocks that were usually submerged. I could hardly paddle my kayak through sections that were normally deep. I was sitting by the river one evening, not fishing, just watching the water, when I heard the crack of breaking wood upstream. Not the sharp snap of a small branch, but the groaning split of something substantial. Then voices, human voices, male, laughing. I got up and walked toward the sound, staying in the shadows of the bank. Around the bend, I saw them. 3 men with chainsaws and a pickup truck backed down to the water. They were cutting cedar, the big ones, the ones that were protected. Poachers. The wood from a single old-growth cedar could be worth thousands on the black market. One of them was pissing in the river, laughing about something. Another was spray painting a mark on the next tree to cut. The third was sharpening his saw. They all had pistols on their hips, the kind of guys who thought guns made them tough. I should have called the Forest Service, reported it, let the authorities handle it. But cell phones didn't work down in this valley, and by the time I hiked out and drove somewhere with signal, they'd be gone. The trees would be gone. I was trying to decide what to do when I felt, rather than heard, movement behind me. She was there, hidden in the ferns, watching the men. I couldn't see her clearly, but I knew it was her, the mother, and I could feel her rage like heat from a fire. The men started up their chainsaw again, the roar of it obscene in the evening quiet. The blade bit into ancient wood, sawdust spraying. That's when the rock flew out of the forest, not thrown like a human would throw, but launched like from a cannon. It hit the chainsaw dead center, shattering the blade, sending metal fragments everywhere. The man holding it screamed and fell backward. "What the hell?" one of them shouted, drawing his pistol, pointing it at the forest. Another rock came from a different angle, hitting the truck's windshield, spider-webbing the glass. Then another, denting the hood. The men were yelling, shooting blindly into the trees. The sound of gunfire echoed off the valley walls. I should have run, should have gotten out of there. But I was frozen, watching this careful, controlled attack. She wasn't trying to kill them, I realized. She was herding them. Each rock pushed them back toward their truck. Each one came from a different direction, making it seem like they were surrounded. "Let's get out of here!" the one with the broken chainsaw yelled, scrambling for the truck. They piled in, gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt as they tore back up the logging road. I waited until the sound of their engine faded completely, then stood up slowly. She emerged from the forest like a piece of it had come alive. Closer than she'd ever been before, maybe 20 feet away. In the evening light, I could see her more clearly. The hair covering her body wasn't uniform. It was shorter on her face and hands, longer on her back and shoulders. Her skin, where visible, was dark grey, almost black, and her face, despite the heavy features, was undeniably female. There was something in the set of her mouth, the shape of her eyes, that spoke of feminine awareness. She looked at me, then at the damaged tree, then back at me. The message was clear. This is what your kind does. This is why we hide. "I'm sorry," I said out loud, not knowing if she'd understand the words, but needing to say them. We're not all like that. She tilted her head, considering. Then she did something that changed everything. She spoke. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely speech. A series of sounds with rhythm and inflection, rises and falls that suggested meaning. It sounded like Wani ku tasanemi. The tone was questioning, curious. I pointed at myself. Tom, I said. My name is Tom. She repeated it, or tried to. It came out more like Tom, but it was unmistakably an attempt at my name. Then she pointed at herself and made a sound like Koya. My legs went weak. I sat down hard on a rock, mind reeling. She had a name. She had language. She was a person, not an animal, not some missing link. A person who lived in these forests, raised children, protected ancient trees, and had just introduced herself to me. Koya watched me process this, something like amusement in her eyes. She made another series of sounds, gestured at the forest around us, then at the damaged tree. This time I caught what might have been repeated elements, possible words. She was trying to tell me something, and the patience in her expression said she knew I was too primitive to understand, but was trying anyway. Over the next hour, as the sun set and the air cooled, we developed a crude communication, pointing and naming, simple concepts. She taught me sounds for water, yata, tree, nem, danger, kosa. I taught her words for the same things. She learned faster than I did, her mimicry almost perfect after 1 or 2 attempts. When full dark came, she stood to leave. But before she melted back into the forest, she made a clear gesture, hand to chest, then pointing at me, then sweeping toward the river. Then a shake of her head, emphatic. Don't come here. Not safe. I understood. The poachers would be back, probably with more men, more guns. They'd been scared off, but not defeated. And if they found me here, if they connected me to what had happened, it would be bad for everyone. I didn't go back to the river for 2 weeks. When I finally did, I found the place where the poachers had been. The damaged tree had been cut down, but not by chainsaws. The cuts were clean, precise, done with hand tools. The stump had been covered with moss and ferns, hidden. Someone had cleaned up, removed evidence, made it look like nothing had ever happened there. On my rock, the one where gifts sometimes appeared, I found a bundle of dried salmon, wrapped in cedar bark, enough to feed a family for a week, and underneath it, scratched in the dirt, symbols that looked like letters. Not English, not any alphabet I knew, but definitely writing. A message I couldn't read but understood anyway. Thank you for not bringing others. Thank you for keeping the secret. September brought the first rains, washing the dust from the leaves, raising the river level. I went back to my normal routine, work and home, dinners with Helen, visits from our grown kids. But everything had changed. I walked through Fred Meyer, buying groceries, surrounded by people who had no idea that 8 miles from town, an entirely different species of person was living, hiding, raising families, and watching us destroy their world inch by inch. The weight of that knowledge was crushing sometimes. I'd be sitting in a town council meeting, listening to debates about development and logging rights, and want to scream. You don't know what's out there. You don't know what we're destroying. But I couldn't. To speak would be to betray Koya's trust. To provide proof would be to ensure her destruction and that of her child, the one I'd pulled from the river. October came with its explosion of colour. Vine maples going scarlet, big leaf maples yellow as sunshine. I went to the river one last time before winter, not expecting to see anything but needing to go anyway. The salmon were running, their bodies dark and spotted, fighting upstream to spawn and die. I sat on my usual rock, watching the fish jump, when I heard movement behind me. Not Koya this time. The young one, though young, was becoming less accurate. In the 6 months since I'd pulled it from the river, it had grown substantially. Still juvenile, but probably 5 feet tall now, gangly in the way of adolescents everywhere. It approached cautiously, stopping about 10 feet away. Like its mother, it had that disturbing combination of ape and human features, but its face was more expressive, less guarded. It watched me with those amber eyes, then did something extraordinary. It spoke. "Tom," it said, pointing at me, then pointing at itself. "Mako." Another name. Another person. I nodded, smiled, trying to look non-threatening. Mako seemed to take this as permission and came closer, squatting down just out of arm's reach. I decided it was a he based on something in the face structure, watched me intently. Then he reached into what I hadn't even realized was a crude pouch made of deer hide and pulled out something. It was a stone, but not just any stone. A piece of river agate, polished smooth, with bands of red and white that caught the light. He held it out to me, patient, waiting. I understood. A gift for a gift. An exchange. I reached into my pocket and found my Swiss Army knife, the one I'd carried for 20 years. I opened it, showing him the blades, the scissors, the tiny saw. His eyes went wide with interest. I folded it closed and held it out to him. The exchange was careful, deliberate. He placed the stone in my hand. I placed the knife in his. He examined it with intense focus, working out the mechanism, opening each tool with increasing excitement. When he found the magnifying glass, he actually laughed, a sound somewhere between human and not, but unmistakably joyful. That's when Koya appeared, moving out of the forest with that unnerving silence. She looked at her son, at the knife in his hands, at me. Her expression was unreadable. For a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, giving technology to them, contaminating their world with ours. But she came closer, closer than she'd ever been, and sat down beside her son. She examined the knife too, serious and thorough. Then she looked at me and made those sounds again, the ones I was starting to recognize as her language. This time, though, she went slowly, added gestures, tried to make me understand. What I got, eventually, was a question. Why? Why did I help? Why did I keep their secret? Why did I come back? I tried to answer with my limited vocabulary and gestures. Pointed at Mako, mimed swimming, drowning. Touched my chest where humans typically locate the heart. Made the gesture she'd taught me for friend, though I wasn't sure I was using it right. She considered this for a long time. Then she stood, towering over me, even though I was sitting on a rock 3 feet high. She placed one massive hand on my shoulder, gentle despite its size. The weight of it was enormous, but the touch was careful, controlled. She spoke again, one word I recognized. Kwan. Family. She'd used it before when gesturing at Mako. Then she added something new, pointing at me as she said it, including me in the gesture. The meaning was clear and impossible, and made my eyes burn with sudden tears. Family. I was being claimed, included, brought into something ancient and secret, and probably dangerous. They left together as the sun started to set, Mako still clutching the knife like a treasure, looking back at me with something like gratitude, or maybe wonder. I sat there until full dark, the agate warm in my hand, trying to understand how my life had come to this moment. 6 months ago, I was just Tom Bradley, hardware store employee, kayaker, normal person with a normal life. Now I was keeper of an impossible secret, friend to creatures that shouldn't exist, guardian of knowledge that would shake the foundations of science and probably get them all killed if it ever came out. I drove home in the dark, the agate in my pocket clicking against my keys. Helen was already in bed when I got home, the house quiet. I sat in my garage, looking at my collection of gifts, the gold nugget, the arrowhead, the carved bone, and now the agate. Evidence of a relationship that couldn't be explained, shouldn't exist, but did. November brought serious rain and snow in the mountains. The river rose, turned brown with runoff. I didn't go back, knew they'd be elsewhere, maybe denned up somewhere warm and dry. But I thought about them constantly, wondered how many others there were, wondered how they'd survived this long without being discovered, documented, destroyed. I started researching, carefully. Library books on anthropology, evolution, local history. Internet searches from the library computer, never my home one. Old newspaper archives, looking for patterns, clues, others who might have seen what I'd seen. What I found was both encouraging and terrifying. Hundreds of sightings over the decades, thousands if you went back further. Native American stories that went back generations, consistent in their descriptions. But also the hunters, the expeditions, the rewards offered for bodies, the circus owners and scientists who wanted specimens, the development that pushed deeper and deeper into wilderness. They were running out of places to hide. That was the truth I couldn't escape. Every year, more roads, more houses, more clear-cuts, satellite imaging that could spot a deer from space, trail cameras and drones and tourists with cell phones everywhere. How long before someone got clear footage? How long before Koya and Mako and the others were exposed? December came with unusual snow, even in the lowlands. Helen and I spent Christmas with our kids and grandkids in Seattle. Normal family stuff, presents and too much food, and the exhausting joy of young children. But I found myself standing at windows, looking at the distant mountains, wondering how they celebrated winter, if they celebrated at all. When we got home, I found something in the garage that shouldn't have been there. A bundle of cedar boughs, tied with twisted grass, placed carefully on my workbench. Nothing disturbed, nothing taken, just this gift that smelled like forest and had to have been placed recently because the needles were still fresh. They'd been here, in my space, while I was gone. The trust that implied was staggering. January was bitter cold, the river frozen at the edges, the mountains locked in snow. I didn't even try to go up there, knew the roads would be impassable. But I felt the pull of it, the need to know they were okay. Mako especially, still young, still growing. Did they have enough food? Warm shelter? Were they safe from the cold that killed so many animals each winter? In February, I saw the news story that changed everything. A developer had bought 3,000 acres along the Skykomish River. The plan was for luxury homes, a golf course, a resort, the exact area where I'd been meeting them, where they lived. I sat at my computer, staring at the map they'd provided, showing the development boundaries. It included everything. The gravel bar where I'd saved Mako, the cedar grove where Koya had driven off the poachers, the pools where salmon ran. All of it would be destroyed, improved, civilized. The public comment period was open for 30 days. There would be meetings, environmental impact studies, all the bureaucratic theater that preceded inevitable approval, because money always won, development always won, progress they called it. I went to the first public meeting, sat in the back, listened to the presentations. The developer was smooth, professional, had answers for every concern, jobs for the community, tax revenue, sustainable practices, whatever that meant. A few environmental groups spoke against it, mentioned wildlife corridors and water quality, but they didn't know, couldn't know what really lived in those forests. That night, I lay awake thinking. I could speak up, tell what I knew, but who would believe me without proof? And if I provided proof, if I showed the gifts, told about Koya and Mako, it would be worse than development. It would be a circus. Scientists, media, hunters, all descending on the area. They'd be captured or killed, studied or displayed. Their freedom, their personhood, would end. March arrived with early warmth, melting snow, making the rivers rage with runoff. I went back as soon as the roads were clear, needed to warn them somehow. But how do you explain development to beings who have no concept of property ownership? How do you describe bureaucracy to someone who lives by seasons and salmon runs? I found Koya by the river, watching the water. She wasn't alone this time. There were two others with her, both male by their builds, both massive. One was older, grey streaking through his dark hair, moving stiffly like his joints hurt. The other was younger, maybe Koya's mate, protectively close to her. They all watched me approach, and I felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. The older one made a sound, low and rumbling, not quite a growl, but definitely a warning. Koya responded with her own sounds, clearly explaining who I was. The tension eased slightly, but didn't disappear. I tried to explain about the development, using my limited vocabulary and lots of gestures. Drew pictures in the dirt, showing houses where forests stood. Made the sound Koya had taught me for danger, kosa, repeatedly. She understood something bad was coming, but I could see she didn't grasp the scale of it. The older male came closer, moving with that careful grace despite his obvious age. He studied my dirt drawings, then looked at me with eyes that held more years than I could imagine. He spoke, slowly, and I caught a few words I recognized. Home, family, safe. Then a word I didn't know, but would never forget. Asosa. The way he said it, with such weight, such finality, I knew it meant something like ending or death. He knew. Somehow, this old patriarch understood that their time was running out. He'd probably watched the forest shrink his whole life, seen the safe places disappear one by one. And now, I was telling him it was happening again, here, in what might be their last refuge. The younger male, Koya's mate I assumed, was less accepting. He paced, agitated, making sharp gestures and harsh sounds. His message was clearer. Fight, defend, drive the humans out like they'd driven out the poachers. But Koya shook her head, made calming gestures. She understood what he apparently didn't, that you can't fight progress with thrown rocks. Not when progress has lawyers and police and guns. Mako appeared then, moving out of the forest with more stealth than he'd had 6 months ago. He'd grown again, was probably 6 feet tall now, still lanky but filling out. He still had the Swiss Army knife, I noticed, worn on a cord around his neck. When he saw me, his face lit up with what could only be described as joy. He came close, closer than any of the adults ever had, and showed me things. Stones he'd shaped using the knife's tools. Cordage he'd made better with the scissors. A small fire starter he'd created using the magnifying glass and dry grass. He was innovative, creative, taking the technology I'd given him and adapting it to his world. The older male watched this interaction with interest. He said something to Koya, who responded at length. They were discussing me, that much was clear. The younger male joined in, still agitated. I caught my name, Tam, several times, and words that seemed to mean trust or not trust, safe or not safe. Finally, the older male approached me. He was massive, probably 7.5 feet tall despite his stoop, and even aged, he radiated power. He placed one hand on my shoulder, as Koya had done months ago, but this felt different, more formal, more significant. He spoke directly to me, slowly, making sure I paid attention. I didn't understand most of the words, but the gesture he made was clear. He pointed at me, at himself, at the others, swept his arms to include the forest, then brought his hands together. Together. Alliance. Partnership. Something like that. Then he did something that stunned me. He pointed at the development map I'd sketched in the dirt, made a negative gesture, then pointed at me with a question in his eyes. Can you stop this? Can you help? I wanted to say yes, wanted to promise I could save their home. But I had to be honest. I shook my head, made the gesture for small that Koya had taught me, pointed at myself. One small human against development money and political influence. Then I pointed at all of them, made the gesture for hidden, safe. They needed to stay secret to survive, which meant I couldn't use the one weapon that might work, public pressure to protect a newly discovered species. The old male understood. His shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded. Then he made a decision that would haunt me forever. He turned to the others and spoke at length, his tone authoritative. They listened, the younger male occasionally protesting, but being overruled. When he finished, Koya was crying, tears streaming down her face, and I understood without words what he'd decided. They would leave, pack up whatever life they had here, and move deeper into the mountains, further from humans, from roads, from development. It would be harder living, less food, harsher winters. Some might not survive, but it was better than being discovered. The younger male stormed off, clearly angry. Koya went after him, probably to console or convince. Mako stayed with the old male and me, looking confused and sad. He knew something major had been decided, but probably didn't fully understand what. The old male looked at me one more time, and in his eyes I saw resignation mixed with something else. Gratitude, maybe. Not for bringing bad news, but for caring enough to warn them, for being, perhaps, the first human in generations to see them as people, rather than monsters or myths. He reached into a pouch similar to Mako's and pulled out something wrapped in leather. He handed it to me, gestured that I shouldn't open it until later. Then he put his hand on Mako's shoulder, guiding him away. They disappeared into the forest, leaving me alone by the river with my guilt and the wrapped gift. I waited until I was home, in my garage with the door locked, before opening it. Inside was a piece of carved antler, larger and more detailed than the one left after the rescue. This one showed multiple figures, clearly Sasquatch, walking in a line through trees. At the end of the line, one figure faced backward, hand raised. The carving was old, the antler yellowed and worn smooth from handling. How many generations had carried this? How many forced migrations had it witnessed? April came with the sound of chainsaws. The development had been approved, of course. Environmental impacts were deemed minimal. The economic benefits outweighed any concerns. Tree removal started immediately, the sound echoing through the valley like a death knell. I went once more to our meeting place, hoping to find some sign they were okay. The gravel bar was empty. The cedar grove was being clear-cut. The salmon pools would soon be diverted for the golf course water features. On my sitting rock, I found one last gift, a single eagle feather placed precisely in the center. A goodbye. That was 3 years ago. I haven't seen them since. Sometimes I hike deep into the mountains, following deer trails and creek beds, looking for signs. Occasionally I find something that might be a footprint, might be a deliberately broken branch, but I can't be sure if it's them or just my desperate imagination. The development is finished now. $1 million homes with river views, a golf course that's won awards for its design, a resort that brings in tourists from Seattle and beyond. Everyone says how beautiful it is, how it's improved the local economy. Nobody mentions the family that was displaced, because nobody knows they existed. I still have the gifts, the gold nugget, the arrowhead, the carved pieces, the agate, the eagle feather. Evidence of a relationship that transformed me, showed me that the world is far stranger and more complex than we imagine. Proof that intelligence and humanity aren't limited to Homo sapiens. Testimony to a tragedy that unfolds every day as we push deeper into the wild places. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I hold that piece of carved antler showing the family walking away. I wonder where they are, if they're still alive, if Mako grew to adulthood, if he still has the Swiss Army knife. I wonder if they found a new home, or if they're still wandering, looking for a place far enough from humans to be safe. Helen passed away last year. Cancer, quick and brutal. Near the end, when she was on so much morphine that the boundaries between real and imagined were blurred, I told her everything. about the rescue, about Koya and Mako, about the gifts and the language and the forced migration. She listened, eyes unfocused, and when I finished, she smiled. "I know, Tom," she said. "I've always known you were keeping something important, something that changed you. Thank you for protecting them." I don't know if she really understood, or if it was the drugs talking, but I choose to believe she knew, and she approved, and she took that secret with her when she died. I'm 71 now. My hands shake when I write. My memory isn't what it was, but I had to document this, had to leave some record that they existed, that they were real, that they were people, not for science or fame or any of the reasons that would destroy them, but because their story deserves to be remembered, even if it can never be proven. I think about that morning on the river often, how a split-second decision to save what I thought was a drowning bear cub changed the trajectory of my life, how it opened my eyes to a parallel world existing alongside ours, hidden in plain sight, how it gave me the privilege and burden of knowing something extraordinary and terrible, that we share this planet with another species of people, and we're driving them to extinction without even knowing they exist. The young ones, if there are any left, will grow up deeper in the wilderness, further from humans. They'll have to range farther for food, work harder to survive, face dangers their ancestors didn't. Some won't make it. The population, already small, will shrink further, and eventually, probably soon, the last one will die, unknown and unmourned by the world that destroyed them, unless they're already gone. That's the thought that haunts me most, that Koya and Mako and the others didn't find a new home, that the stress of moving, the scarcity of food, the harsh winters in the high country were too much, that I'm writing about the dead, that my memories are all that's left of them. But sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rises off the river, I swear I hear it, a low call, almost below the range of human hearing, echoing off the mountains. It might be wind in the trees or distant thunder, or my old mind playing tricks. But I choose to believe it's them, still out there, still surviving, still watching the humans spread across the land that was once theirs. I keep the gifts in a safety deposit box now, along with this account. My children will find them when I'm gone. They'll probably think their old man was crazy, collecting rocks and bones and making up stories. They'll likely throw them away or donate them to some museum that will catalogue them as artifacts of unknown origin. But maybe, just maybe, one of them will hold that carved antler, see the family walking away, and understand. Maybe they'll look at the forest differently, wondering what might be watching from the shadows. Maybe they'll be more careful, more respectful, knowing that we're not alone, that we never were. I go to the river one more time each spring, on the anniversary of the rescue. The luxury homes gleam in the sunshine. The golf course stretches green and perfect where the cedar grove once stood. Tourists take selfies by the water, never knowing that something magnificent and impossible once lived here. I sit on a bench, an old man with old memories, and I wait. I don't expect to see them. I know they're gone from this place, driven out by our insatiable hunger for land and profit. But I wait anyway, because waiting has become a form of prayer, a meditation on loss and wonder and the terrible price of progress. Last week, on this year's visit, something different happened. A young boy, maybe 6 years old, was throwing rocks in the river while his parents looked at their phones. He had red hair and curious eyes, reminded me a little of Mako at that age, if Mako had been human. The boy threw a rock that went wild, landing near my bench. "Sorry, mister," he said, coming to retrieve it. "No harm done," I told him. "You know, there used to be giants in these forests." His eyes went wide. "Real giants?" "Real as you and me," I said. "They were tall as trees and strong as bears, but gentle too. They had families and names and languages we couldn't understand." What happened to them? The boy asked. We built houses where they lived, I said. So they had to go find somewhere else. That's sad, the boy said. Where did they go? Far away, I said. Up in the mountains where people don't go. Maybe they're still there, if we leave them alone. The boy's mother called him back, giving me a suspicious look. Probably thought I was a crazy old man filling her kid's head with nonsense. But the boy waved goodbye, and as he walked away, I heard him tell his mother about the giants in the forest. She laughed, told him it was just a story. But he looked back at me, and I nodded. Not just a story. Never just a story. And maybe, when he's older, when the world has disappointed him with its lack of mystery, he'll remember the old man by the river who told him about giants. Maybe he'll go looking. Maybe he'll be more careful, more watchful, more open to the impossible. That's all I can do now. Plant seeds of possibility. Leave clues for those willing to see them. Guard the secret while hinting at its existence. It's not much, but it's something. The sun is setting as I write this final entry. Through my window, I can see the mountains, snow-capped and distant. Somewhere up there, or nowhere anymore, a family I briefly knew continues their ancient, hidden life. A mother who trusted me with her child's rescue and her people's secret. A son who might be a father himself by now, if he survived. An elder who chose exile over exposure. A mate who wanted to fight, but accepted flight. They gave me gifts of gold and stone and carved memory. But the real gift was knowledge. The knowledge that we're not alone, not unique, not the only intelligent life on this planet. The knowledge that personhood comes in forms we haven't imagined. The knowledge that we're destroying wonders before we even discover them. I saved a child from drowning 60 months ago. It was the most important thing I've ever done, and I can never tell anyone who would believe me. That's my burden and my privilege. To know that on one April morning, in the cold waters of the Skycomish River, I held the hand of another species of humanity and recognized the spark of consciousness looking back at me. Koya, if you're still out there, still alive, know this. I kept the secret. I honored the trust. I remembered you and Mako and all your kind with respect and grief and gratitude. You changed me, made me more than I was, showed me that the world still holds mysteries worth protecting. Your gifts sit in a metal box in a bank, waiting for someone to find them and wonder. But the real gift, the one that transformed me, was the weight of your hand on my shoulder, claiming me as family. I've carried that weight every day since, and I'll carry it until I join Helen, wherever she is. The shadows are lengthening. The river is calling, as it always does. Tomorrow, if my legs allow, I'll go back one more time. I'll sit by the water and listen to the current and remember. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, very quiet, I'll hear that low call echoing off the mountains, telling me they're still out there, still surviving, still watching from the edges of our ever-expanding world. That's my story. That's what happened when I saved what I thought was a drowning bear cub. That's how I learned that Bigfoot is real, and female, and a mother, and a person, and dying out because of us. That's why I can never sleep soundly, never stop listening for sounds in the forest, never stop checking the shadows between the trees. Make of it what you will. Call me crazy if you must. But know this. Every legend has a seed of truth. Every myth began as someone's reality. And every monster story is really about fear of the other, the unknown, the uncontrolled. We made them into monsters because we couldn't accept them as people. Because if they're people, then driving them to extinction is murder, not management. I am Tom Bradley. I am 71 years old, and I am the keeper of an impossible secret, the witness to an invisible tragedy, the recipient of gifts from a mother who watched me save her drowning child in a rushing river. This is my testimony. This is my burden. This is my truth. Remember them, even if you never believed they existed. Remember that once, maybe still, Beings of incredible strength and surprising gentleness walked these forests, raised their children, and watched our light spread across the land that was once dark and safe and theirs. Remember that we're not as alone as we think, and not as important as we assume, and not as knowing as we pretend to be. And if you ever find yourself by a river in flood, and you see something that shouldn't exist struggling in the current, I hope you make the same choice I did. I hope you reach out, despite your fear and disbelief, and pull it to safety. Because in that moment of choosing compassion over caution, of action over analysis, you might discover what I discovered, that the world is stranger than we know, and more fragile, and infinitely more deserving of our protection than our exploitation. The carved antler sits on my desk as I write these final words. The family walking away, one looking back. I'm that figure now, looking back at a time when giants walked the forests and left gifts on river rocks for an old man who kept their secret. Soon, I'll be gone too, and this story will be all that remains. A crazy tale from a hardware store employee who spent too much time alone on the river. A fantasy born of isolation and imagination. But you and I know better, don't we? We know that somewhere between the maps and the mysteries, between the known and the impossible, between the human and the almost human, there exists a truth too dangerous to prove and too important to forget. We know that Koya and Meko were real, are real, might still be real if we haven't driven them past the point of survival. That's enough. That's my witness. That's my gift to them and curse to myself, the burden of impossible knowledge and the weight of species-level grief. I saved a child and gained a family and lost a world I didn't know existed until it was already disappearing. Listen for the calls in the night. Look for the signs in the forest. Leave gifts on rocks by rivers. And remember, always remember, that we share this world with more than we know, and every extinction is a library burning, a language dying, a way of being in the world lost forever. This is Tom Bradley, signing off. May Koya and Mako and all their kind find peace in whatever refuge remains to them. May their children grow strong and stay hidden. May their stories outlive the civilization that couldn't see them as anything but myths. And may you, reading this, understand that the greatest discoveries aren't made in laboratories or universities, but in moments of desperate compassion by rushing rivers, when we reach out to save something we don't understand and find our own humanity reflected in ancient eyes that shouldn't exist but do. The river is calling, the mountains are watching, and somewhere, maybe nowhere anymore, a mother remembers a kayaker who saved her drowning child and changed both their worlds forever. That's all. That's everything. That's the truth that weighs more than gold and cuts deeper than obsidian and matters more than anything else I've ever done or known or been. Waniku Tasanemi. I don't know exactly what it means, but Koya said it that day by the damaged cedar, and something in her tone made me think it might mean thank you, or perhaps we are all connected, or possibly the sadness is coming, but we face it together. Whatever it meant, I say it back to her now, across the years and miles and species divide. Wani Kutasa Nemi, Koya, Wani Kutasa Nemi.